Good morning, everyone. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Right, I will go ahead and get us started. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the How to Apply webinar series part 1 for the second funding wave of Communities in Charge. Super grateful for your time today. My name is Xiomara Chavez, and I am the lead project manager for Communities in Charge, and I'm joined by the rest of my team as well. But I will go ahead and get us started. Next slide. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping. Zoom Logistics, you are currently in webinar mode. So you're unable to, you know, unmute yourself to speak, or you do not need to be on video. But if you are interested in asking questions throughout the presentation, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box. And then we will be monitoring those, answer any of them in writing if we can. And then you're welcome to use the chat box as well. But mainly put your questions in the Q&A. And then at the end of our presentation, we will have a Q&A session where you can ask as many questions as you'd like. And next slide. Okay, so for today, we will be going over some of the goals of this webinar, update y'all on what are the changes that were made to Communities in Charge for the second funding wave, and then go over incentives amounts, eligibility, how to apply, how these applications are tiered, scored, and awarded, provide y'all with some resources, important dates, then we will have our Q&A. And yeah, that's the bulk of our agenda. Next slide. Okay, so we do have a couple of poll questions for y'all throughout the presentation, so just stay tuned. But for this first poll question, how did you hear about Communities in Charge? Please select one of the following selections, which is a public meeting, through social media, CalSTART newsletter, a CEC docket announcement, were you referred by a CBO or referred by Grid Alternatives or other? we will be closing in a few seconds. All right. Okay. Feel free to end the poll and share those results. It looks like a majority of you are from our CalSTART newsletter and the CEC docket announcements. Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Okay, stop sharing and next slide. Okay, then our second poll question for y'all is, are you attending on behalf of an equity-focused community-based organization? If yes, please include your organization name. All right, go ahead and end the poll. Okay, so it looks like a majority of you are not from a CBO, but thank you for being here. Okay, stop sharing and the next slide, please. Okay, webinar goals. What are we here to do? Next slide. Okay, so by the end of this webinar, we hope that you are able to identify what's the difference between funding wave 1 and 2 and what are the changes that are coming along with it. Where do you apply to Communities in Charge and how to get that process started? What does applying to this project look like? And then what are the documents and information that you must provide to be able to apply successfully and have a competitive application? And then when applicants begin the process, and how long do y'all have to complete it? And then what are the resources currently available to y'all potential applicants? Next slide. Okay, so project updates. Next slide. Alrighty, so just some quick information about Communities in Charge in general. We are a cohort of project partners. I am from CalSTART. We are the implementer and we are funded through the California Energy Commission, through the Clean Transportation Program, and we have some of them joining us here today. Our equity and outreach partner is Grid Alternatives, and then Tetra Tech helps us with incentive processing. Next slide. And then just some quick tidbits about Communities in Charge. We are a market accelerating light duty EV charging incentive project, as mentioned earlier, funded by the California Energy Commission. And we're here to transform EV accessibility, rapidly catalyze new markets, and swiftly deploy level 2 EV charging stations. And for the second funding wave, we have a total of 38 million that is dispersed across the state in 4 different regions, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Next slide. Okay, so what are our priorities for funding wave 2? We are hoping to increase the diversity of project sites for this application window, and we want to broaden the geographic distribution and diversity of awardees across the state and encourage greater diversity in our applicant pool. So as mentioned earlier, disbursement across the state as equitably as possible. Next slide. Okay, funding allocations across the state. As mentioned earlier, we have a total of 38 million available to applicants for this funding wave, and we have adopted the region cookie cutter, as I like to call it, of regions for the state of California. And so this golden region is Northern California. This like teal blue is the eastern and includes the eastern part of the state and what we consider the Central Valley, or most of the Central Valley. The darker blue is central, that is like Central Coast, as well as the Bay Area or parts of the Bay Area. And then the southern regions include the LA County, Orange County, San Diego County. And these allocations that you see on this far right column were determined through an algorithm that takes into consideration DAC, LIC populations, and any prior funding distributions to allocate funding in these 4 different regions as equitably as possible. So for the northern part of the state, that golden area is 8 million. Central, which includes the Central Coast and parts of the Bay Area, is 12 million. The eastern portion, including parts of the Central Valley, is 7 million. And then Southern California, which is LA County, Orange County, San Diego, is getting 11 million. Next slide. So the other 2 project updates is we are going to place a cap that no one applicant or organization can receive more than 25% of all available funding. And then one minor change is for funding wave 2, recipients who received a notice of conditional award had an additional 90 days to get themselves up to essentially a tier 1 status applicant, but we have decided to remove the initial 90 days and everyone will start at the 270 calendar day installation window. And then we'll be trying to have our extensions policy a little bit more flexible than we did for funding wave 1. Next slide. Okay, so incentive amounts, how much are we getting per connector for funding wave 2? Next slide. So the incentive amounts per connector have remained the same from funding wave 1 over to funding wave 2. So the base incentive is up to $3,500 or 75% of eligible costs. If you are a multi-family housing project site, you can get the base incentive plus an additional $3,500. And then if you are a tribal government, tribal entity, non-governmental organization serving tribal communities, you also get an additional $3,500 on top of the base incentive. Next slide. And then the limitations per connector is every project must have a minimum of 4 connectors. And then the maximum amount of connectors for most project sites is up to 20. But if you are a workplace charging site or a multi-family housing site, and that's regardless if you're a community connection or not, then you can get up to 40 chargers. Next slide. All right, eligibility. And I believe that is where I pass it over to my colleague, Patricia Milbury.
Thanks, CEO. I appreciate it. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so during these slides, we're going to talk about eligibility and who is able to apply. So to participate in Communities in Charge, applicants must be the property owner, lessee, or the authorized representative, or be the one who actually incurs the cost for the project. Next slide, please. How do you know if your project site is eligible? So as far as eligibility goes, it's going to include real property with an identifiable address in California. installed level 2 EV chargers will remain in operation for the duration of their network agreement. And it has to have public or private access to the site. It doesn't have to, be public to be eligible. So definitely if it's either or, you are able to apply for incentives. So non-eligible project sites include single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, individual mobile homes, new build sites, project sites that have funding stacked with IOU and LED WP incentives. Next slide, please. Equipment eligibility. So these do not apply to our equipment right now, but this is going to be looking forward, and it's going to start January 1 of 2024 and then go into July 1 of 2024. So in coordination with the California Energy Commission, Communities in Charge is just reminding all applicants that these are the changes that are going to be coming moving forward. You can learn more about this in our implementation manual under section 2.4. Next slide, please. Community connections explained. So important reminder is that your application, your project site does not have to be a community connection in order to be eligible for incentives. It is just more as far as the scoring tiered, and you'll just be scored accordingly if you are a community connection versus if you are not. Communities in Charge does have the following connections. So it includes multifamily housing, tribes in charge, congregations in charge, schools in charge, healthcare in charge, nonprofits in charge, local government in charge, and workplaces in charge. Community connections are identified locations where community members live together, live and gather. These sites are elevated in the equity score rubric. So you will see that later on that there is an additional portion for if an applicant does qualify as a community connection. Next slide, please. All right, so in the next couple slides, I'll be covering some of the documentation that you can go ahead and start gathering now and thinking about if you're looking to apply. And then later on, we will actually show the screenshots as to what the application is going to look like in our incentive processing center. Next slide, please. So as you get ready to sit down and apply, some of the applicant information you'll need to provide is your organization name, the primary contact, and the authorized signatory and your tax ID. There will be an incentive recipient agreement that will need to be signed, and that's why we need to know who the authorized signatory party of that document is going to be. So it's just helpful for us to have that up front. You'll also need to provide your project site information. So you'll need to know the installation address, and then you'll also have to identify the project site type. So whether you plan on being a community connection or not, you will have to identify which one that is. And you'll have to fill out a site verification form. This includes the installation address, your applicant information, and the property owner information. You can get this form from the Communities in Charge website. If you look under our documents tab, you will find the site verification form. And then the next is the job installation form. It includes prevailing wage and EVITP compliance affidavit, the equipment information, and the installation compliance statement. This form can also be found on the Communities in Charge website as well. Next slide, please. All right, so the documents that you can start pulling together as well. All applicants will be required to submit some type of site design. So either that's going to be your final site design or your preliminary site plans. This includes a copy of electrical and construction drawings. These may be obtained in coordination with your contractor or utility. And then you may be able to provide your issued building permit or the building permit application. The permit application submitted to permitting agency, so a copy of the site plan submitted to the agency. These also may be obtained in coordination with your city and or county. And then if you are a community connection, you can support that additional documentation. If you're not, then you can just move forward and that won't apply. But just visit the implementation manual to get some more information on our community connections. And then if it is applicable, this is where you will submit your letters of support from the community-based organization. Next slide. And this is just a visual aid to see the different documentations that are required for the different tiering. So you will see the common documents that need to be submitted between all three is going to be the site verification form and either the preliminary site design or the final site design. And it's important to note here that if you don't have those two documents, you won't be able to proceed in the application. You'll see later on, you will receive an error message that will note to you to please submit those documents before you can move forward. But the other documents, those are optional, and then some of them may not apply at all, just depending on the tiering. Next slide, please. All right, this is a really important disclaimer for everyone. So when you sit down to start your application, try to do so in one sitting. Exiting the application before finishing it will result in any of the data that you've already entered not being saved. So we definitely recommend that you try to sit down and do it at a time where you're not interrupted. All right, and I believe I'll be passing over to my colleague.
Thank you so much, Trish. My name is Jeff Cook, and I'm the Deputy Director for Light Duty EV Infrastructure Incentive Administration here at CalSTART, and I'll be guiding you through the Incentive Processing Center, or IPC, portion of things to kind of revisit what that process looks like to any new applicants who might be applying, and as a refresher to those who are returning to us from Funding Wave 1. Next slide. So you'll start by navigating to the Communities in Charge website, which may be accessed via that link. It is also thecommunitiesin-charge.org, and the slides will be made available shortly after we conclude today's meeting. Once you have navigated to the Communities in Charge website, you can either log into the Incentive Processing Center by clicking on My Account. You'll be presented with the username and password and offered up the opportunity to log in. If, however, you are not a member, meaning this is your first time applying to Communities in Charge, you will need to click Not a Member and fill out a new registration that includes a little bit more information to establish your account in the IPC. Next slide. So if you've never applied to Communities in Charge, you will complete the steps below. It includes first name, last name, email, phone, the title of whomever it is that is registering, what's the name of your organization, etc. Be sure to log these credentials somewhere safe, as you will need them to log back into your Incentive Processing Center profile, and that is the primary source from which you'll be able to check in on any submitted applications, monitor any awards should you be chosen to receive them, as well as submit any support requests if you need to update information, or payment requests as you make your way further along in the life cycle of your project. Once you are logged into the application portal, you'll navigate over to the Applications tab. Next slide. Once you've navigated over to that Applications tab, you'll select Start New Application to begin. On the screen here, it's a little bit small, but you will be able to view it on the IPC, are some instructions that mirror the guidance that my colleagues have provided thus far, which is, one, we do encourage you to complete your application in one sitting. Now, depending upon the magnitude of, or quantity rather, of documents that you are submitting, then it may take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes to complete your application. We do encourage you to have all of your application materials on hand when you start your application. And if you're curious as to which ones need to be part of your overall application packet and you want to begin gathering those together in the lead up to the launch of Funding Wave 2, well, we have an application checklist available on the Documents tab of our website that you can feel free to download and mark up, hold on to for your records so you can ensure you have all the information you might need to submit a successful and complete application to Communities in Charge. However, at a bare minimum, you will need to know what is the installation site. So where is the precise street address that you will be or hoping to apply for funding for chargers. You'll also need to have your site verification form. You'll also need to have at least a preliminary site plan. Any application that does not have at least its signed site verification form and a preliminary site plan cannot be scored, as it does not meet the minimum tiering requirements for Communities in Charge at this time. If you've got all that in front of you and you're ready to move forward, you'll click on Start New Application. Next slide. So once you've selected Start New Application, again, it will brief you with when the application window is due to begin. Make sure that you are sitting down to apply during that application window and click Start New Application. I think this might have actually been a duplicate of the last one, but next slide. All right, a couple of things to bear in mind when you are sitting down to do your application is that construction must not have begun at your site as of the date when the application window has opened. Projects who have already begun construction are ineligible for incentives. If you're unsure whether you have all the necessary materials to apply, as I mentioned before, do visit our website. Under the Documents tab, you should be able to find an application checklist that will provide you a high-level overview of all the information and documents you should have prepared prior to sitting down and submitting your application. All of your application materials must be submitted prior to the application window closing, and there will be no extensions granted for any applications who are unable to meet that timeline. Once you've submitted your application, no further changes to that application can be made. It is very similar to dropping it into the digital mail. However, if you do wish to make a change to a submitted application while an application window is open, for instance, you've gotten an updated document that might otherwise have qualified you for a higher tier, no worries there. Feel free to submit a support request and our application processing team will assist you in getting that document updated prior to the closure of an application window. So once you've got all of this in mind, you click on Confirm. Next slide. The next screen, so stay on this slide, but the next screen here greets you with the address. So you will need to enter the project site address and confirm whether or not construction has begun. We do have you confirm this at a couple of stages. So you'll enter the precise street address and as it's recorded across all of your other programmatic documentation. As a reminder, if you're submitting for multiple project sites, you will need to submit an individual application for each project site. Meaning if you have different locations, different locales across the state of California that you are hoping to seek out Communities in Charge funding, each one of those does necessitate its own unique application to Communities in Charge. Once you have entered the project site address and confirmed that construction has not begun at your project site, you can click Continue. Next slide. This screen here is confirming that you are establishing an application. It provides you with your application number. You can feel free to log that away for your records. Otherwise, it will be made available to you once you complete your application and submit it under the Applications tab of your IPC profile. So you'll click Continue, and next slide. Once you've clicked Continue, you'll need to review all of your applicant and organization information and primary point of contact for accuracy. This is very important. So make sure that you have entered the primary point of contact email address accurately, spelled the business or organization name correctly, and just making sure that all of your I's are dotted and T's are crossed with respect to who you are as the applicant, confirming that that is appropriate. For those of you who are returning to us from Funding Wave 1, this is a great opportunity just to double check and make sure that that is accurate. And before you move forward with subsequent applications during Funding Wave 2. Next slide. We do ask that you please provide an alternate contact in the event that Communities in Charge staff is not able to contact the primary contact. We all know folks take vacation, or sometimes folks transition from one area of an organization to another. All awardees will be required to also sign an incentive recipient agreement prior to disbursement of incentives to be eligible for incentives to be dispersed to you. So it is important that you provide the information of the organization's authorized signatory who is duly authorized to execute legal documents and the incentive recipient agreement. Make sure that the name and precise email address is accurate there. Once all of that looks correct, you'll click on Save and Continue. Next slide. If you have some more unique address considerations, such as a parcel number or lat-long coordinates that you would like to include, feel free to put these in here now. So you'll want to provide those unique addresses for the project site on which the EVSCs shall be installed. If you have a parcel number or lat-long coordinates, feel free to include those here. And then you'll click Save and Continue. Next slide. We do also want to know what type of project site this is. A project site does not have to be a community connection, but we do want to know what type of site is it that you are going to be installing these chargers at. Some examples of project sites are multifamily housing, workplace charging, just as some examples. Next slide. If you happen to have this information available at the time you submit your application, please make sure that you have that you include the information on your general contractor. So if you have that information available, select Yes, and then click Save and Continue. Next slide. If you have selected Yes, then you must provide the contractor name, their license number, the company name that they may be from, and any total number of general electricians that are on site. Once you've entered this information, you'll click Save and Continue. Next slide. If you happen to have the names and identifiable information for EVITP certified technicians who will be on site, please select Yes here if you have selected your EVITP certified electricians. You'll click Save and Continue. Next slide. If you selected Yes, you must provide that electrician name and their EVITP certification number. So the electrician first name, electrician last name, and their EVITP certification number. You can also add multiple EVITP certified electricians by clicking Add Another Electrician. Once you've made all of your selections and added all of the installation staff necessary, you'll click Save and Continue. Next slide. Here's the point where you will select from the list of eligible EVSCs for your particular funding wave. There is a drop-down list that shows makes and models of the eligible chargers that you may receive funding from under Communities in Charge. Each of these also includes the quantity of connectors. For instance, is this charger a single connector charger or a dual connector charger? And that number will automatically be reflected in the system. You'll select the make and model of those chargers, however many quantity of them there are, and click Add Equipment. Once you have added all of the equipment you anticipate being installed at your project site, you'll click Save and Continue. Next slide. One thing that's important to mention with respect to the previous slide on connectors is that there is a minimum connector count of 4 and a maximum connector count of 20 for certain project sites, and 40 for multifamily housing or workplace charging. The Incentive Processing Center should automatically control for that, meaning you are not allowed to select fewer than 4 connectors, and you are not allowed to select greater than 40 connectors. The stage we're at here is a very important one, uploading your documents. For each of the documents that you may be able to submit at the time you are applying, you'll see the list of them available here. To upload a document, you'll select the bubble next to the document you would like to upload and select Upload Selected Documents, where you can drag and drop the files or select from a folder in your computer to upload the requisite file. Next slide. In the box below, you can either click Upload Files to select from the file structure on your computer, or you can drag and drop a file from, say, your desktop that you wish to upload onto the box. If the document upload is successful, you will see a preview of the document and the box will turn green. If, however, you've realized that, oh, this is not the correct document I meant to upload, click on the little trash can in the top right-hand corner. That will remove the upload for that particular document, and you'll be afforded the opportunity to upload the correct one. Next slide. The IPC will be able to recognize, as I mentioned, if the minimum documentation is not met. So if you have not uploaded at least your site verification form and a site design form, either preliminary site plan or final site plan. If you have not uploaded those, you'll be met with an error message and be prompted to click Back to Documents. It's at that point where you would go back to your documents, review which ones you have uploaded, and make sure you rectify any errors or missed documents that you have yet to upload. Next slide. Once you've completed all of this, uploaded your selected documents, we at this point know where is your project site. We know what type of project site is it. Is it multifamily housing? Is it a K through 12 school? Is it a health institution such as a hospital? We know what stage of maturity or readiness this project is at. Do you happen to have your issued building permit, final site plan, and site verification form? Or do you just at this point have your site verification form and a preliminary site plan? All of this culminates to reviewing and submitting your application. This is dropping it off in the proverbial mail. It is important to note that by submitting the application to Communities in Charge, you are acknowledging to have read, understood, and agreed to be bound by the requirements set forth in the current Communities in Charge implementation manual, as well as the published terms and conditions available on our website. You do agree that an application to Communities in Charge does not constitute a guarantee of award, and any costs that you incur are done so at the applicant's own risk. If that application is chosen for an award, an incentive recipient agreement must be executed prior to any payment of incentives being dispersed to a particular awardee. So once you've reviewed all of this, clicked I agree to the terms, you'll click on Submit Application. Next slide. This screen indicates that your application is complete. It has been successfully submitted to the Incentive Processing Center. If we could actually go back one slide, I wanted to underscore a piece of text here that if you do need to make changes to a submitted application prior to the window closing, you will at this point be able to submit a support request through the Incentive Processing Center to accompany your already submitted application. So if for some reason you neglected to include a document that might have garnered you a higher readiness tier and the application window has yet to close, do please submit that support request as soon as possible so that our application processing team can evaluate your request and update any of the documentation as needed. Next slide. Great, this is your confirmation. If at this point you wanted to view the applications that are currently in your profile, you would click on Back to Applications. If this were the first one you were submitting, you would see the application number and the short form of the installation address just for your reference, and see that the application status has been changed to Submitted, indicating that you have submitted your application. Next slide. All right, that was the whole lot to take in. Granted, that is very close to identical to the experience that folks from Funding Wave 1 had with our Incentive Processing Center. So you should find it welcome that it is very similar to the last one. There might be a couple of additional questions that you find when you do visit the IPC upon opening of Funding Wave 2. They are relatively small in nature. So at this point, we're going to move on to another poll question, and we'd like to learn how many project sites do you expect you shall apply for? If we could launch that poll here. Are you expecting to apply maybe just for a few, meaning 1 to 10 project sites, maybe a dozen or more, 11 to 25? Are we looking at applying 26 to 50 project sites, or even larger than that, more than 51 project sites? We'll leave it a moment here for those to kind of level out. Give folks maybe about 10 more seconds to submit their input here. Again, how many project sites do you expect you shall apply for during Funding Wave 2? Okay, I believe we can end the poll at this point. We can share those results. So the vast majority of you, 72%, planning to submit between 1 and 10 project sites, followed by 17% of those responded submitting 11 to 25 project sites, and then around 6% each for those anticipating they will submit anywhere from 26 to 50 or even more than 50 applications for project sites. Thank you so much. All right, I think we can move on to the next slide here. This is another poll question. Do you expect to submit documentation to be considered a community connection? And as a reminder, a community connection is a particular project site that represents a significant contribution to its community and the surrounding residents. So we can launch that poll question here. Are you expecting that you may submit for multifamily housing in charge, tribes in charge, congregations in charge, schools in charge, healthcare in charge, nonprofit in charge, or local governments in charge? And we'll leave that a moment to level out. There still seems to be a good amount of activity here. All right, maybe about 10 more seconds. Looks like some folks are still entering in their selections here. Okay, so things seem to have leveled off. We can go ahead and end the poll, and we can share those results. So the majority of you, 46%, maybe not the majority of you, but a good chunk, 46% of those who responded indicated they intend to submit for multifamily housing in charge, seconded by schools in charge. So 27% of those who responded indicate they would apply for schools in charge. Then followed closely by nonprofits in charge and congregations in charge, with 20% and 15% of respondents indicating that they would apply for nonprofits and congregations respectively. And then roughly the same for tribes in charge, healthcare in charge, and I didn't even scroll down here, workplaces in charge, 34%, and local governments in charge, with no community connection representing about 10% of those who responded. So certainly see some concentrations under workplaces in charge and multifamily housing in charge, but a good spread across the number of different community connections. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for participating in the poll. I'm going to pass it back over to my colleague to finish things out here. I believe this is going back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and get started on the next section. After this, we will do the Q&A, so no worries. We'll answer all the questions that you guys may have. So tiering, scoring, and awarding is what we're going to go into next. So how are tiers determined? You have your readiness tiers. So basically tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Documents provided at the time of application is going to determine which tier you are going to fall into. So tier 1, site verification plus your final site design plus your issued building permit will yield you tier 3, or sorry, tier 1. Tier 2, you have your site verification form plus final site design plus your building permit application. Tier 3 would be site verification form plus your preliminary site plan. So similar to the first funding wave, so nothing really too much has changed there. So how are applicants scored? So our scoring rubric is divided into 2 community connections, and your points awarded. The max number is going to be 10. So community connection, project site is defined as community connection. You get 10 right there. Priority population designation, is it disadvantaged community or low-income community or tribal and low-income community, LIC, DAC, max points is going to be 5. DAC or tribal only will get you 4, and LIC only will get you 3 points. Local support points awarded per letter, max of 3 per applications. So any letters of support from community-based organizations serving the same community as a project, the project site will get you 1 point, but like I said, max you can get up to 3 on that bad boy. And max points possible is going to be 18 all scored together right here. And do not worry, like my colleagues have said before, we are going to send this slide deck and the video out so you guys can have this at your disposal. Okay, so we are going to jump into another poll question. Number 5, which readiness tier do you expect you're submitting applications to be in? So we're going to go ahead and get that poll started, and please select all that apply. Let me go ahead and launch that for everyone. There you go. And just give it a few more, just a little bit more time here. Okay, I'll go ahead and end the poll now. And go ahead and share those results. So 47% of you said tier 1 would be application readiness that you plan on applying with. 31% would be tier 2, 9% tier 3, and 40% are not sure. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing those, and thank you guys or gals for your participation. Let me go ahead and get this going. So how are awardees determined? So as mentioned earlier, my colleague with the new update, we are cookie cutting it into northern, southern, and central and eastern regions. As you can tell right here, award order is going to be first, is going to be readiness tier 1s. Rubric score will be highest to lowest. That's going to be all across the board. Second, readiness tier 2s, highest to lowest. Third, readiness tier 3, highest to lowest. And like I said, that's right across the board for northern, southern, central, and eastern regions. Notice of awards. So notice of conditional awards will be provided to awardees for readiness tiers 2 and 3. Once you receive that notice of conditional award, next steps that you are going to follow is going to be submit a copy of final site plan through the IPC within 90 calendar days. Step 2 is going to be submit a copy of issued building permits through the IPC within 90 calendar days. And step 3, await verification of documents submitted and notice of final award will be sent over to you as well. We will jump into the notice of final award once that reaches you. That's going to be awarded for readiness tier 1. after the conditional awardees. So the next step after you receive the notice of final award, you will submit a request for midpoint payment. That would be optional through the IPC if you all want to do that. Not a requirement, like I said, optional. Step 2, submit a request for final payment through the IPC. And as my colleague said before, we kind of did a walkthrough of that. So like I said, we will send these over to you, the slide deck, so you'll have that at your disposal. Reminder, awardees, conditional or final, have 270 days from their initial award to complete their project and submit for final payment. Okay, and we're going to jump into the resources tabs here to kind of help you guys along the way if you have any questions or anything along those lines. Communities in Charge resources. So first thing, right out the gate, you can always visit our Communities in Charge website. Here you'll find all the information to the projects and have access to all necessary documents such as the implementation manual, site verification form, resource library, access to the IPC, eligible equipment list, and eligible network providers. We also recommend visiting the Community in Charge docket. There you can find announcements, project updates, anything along those lines with Communities in Charge. If you need to get in contact with us, you can do that through the contact form through our website as well. It will give you a update. If you want to ask us a one-on-one question, anything along those lines about Communities in Charge, feel free to do that. You also may sign up for our office hours. Now, that's more one-on-one with the team. If you have any pressing questions or anything along those lines that you feel you need to have a conversation with us, feel free to go ahead and send us a message using the contact form. Also, you can connect with our sister company as well, Grid Alternatives. They'll be happy to help out with any questions that you may have regarding any project information at all. So, and like I said, we'll send this over to you guys after. So timelines and important dates that are coming up. So some of the important dates to share with you all. How to apply webinar part 2 is going to be October 19th, 2023. I believe if you signed up for this, there was an email and social blast that had the follow-up to this. So looking forward to seeing everyone there to follow up. So we also have the incurred cost dates. That is on September 28th, 2023. Application window opening November 7th at 2023 at 9 a.m. So good news to share with y'all. The application window will be opening relatively soon. So get those documents ready. Application window will close December 22nd. So November 7th through December 22nd at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So make sure you get those applications in. Applications receive notice of their readiness tier. Now that's going to be approximately 3 to 4 weeks after window closing. So after December 22nd, you can expect something via email letting you know your readiness tier. Applicants receive award notification approximately 6 to 8 weeks after the window is closing. Block grant project design public workshop. Now that's going to be done in November 2023. I believe if you can sign up in CEC, and correct me if I'm wrong on that one, they'll be able to do a public workshop for you. So keep an eye out for that. Golden State Priority Project for the Northern and Southern region is now open, and they will be closing December 12th, 2023. Now, keep in mind, some of these timelines may be subject to change, but for the most part, these are the important dates to keep in mind. Okay, poll question number 6, and then we're going to go ahead and get into the Q&A. So how would you describe your overall satisfaction with the information provided during today's webinar? Let me go ahead and start that poll right now. You guys know, I'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and put in your answers, and then I'll share them afterwards. Okay, just a few more seconds and I'll go ahead and end the poll. Okay, go ahead and share the results. So 45% of you were very satisfied with the information given. 45 enough, 45s were satisfied, 5% neutral, and about 2% were in the dissatisfied and very dissatisfied category. Well, thank you guys for giving your feedback on that. We do appreciate it. We'll go ahead and jump into the Q&A part of this webinar. Just to remind you that, ways to communicate, if you're on the phone or Zoom, definitely on the phone, *6, toggle mute, unmute, *9 will raise hand. Obviously in the Zoom bar, you can do that as well. What we're going to do is we are going to answer the questions that have not been answered yet in the Q&A first, and then we'll get into the, if you guys have any live questions, so to speak. I am actually going to go off camera to save some bandwidth, but I'll be able to read off some of the questions. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay. First one, I believe, Jeff, this is directed towards you. This is from Shannon. Is there any way for us as EVSE owners / operators to provide our contact information to property owners as they may be looking for partners to work with on applications?
Yeah, so a couple of things to share there. Given CalSTART is the implementer of Communities in Charge, funded through the Energy Commission and funded by the Clean Transportation Program, CalSTART is industry and organization agnostic in that case. So we do not pass along any information for advertisement purposes. The only use that we have for the application materials submitted by applicants is to process the applications that they submit to us. So I think any avenues or channels that you might have to otherwise engage with interested property owners, those would be the established channels that we would advise you to rely upon.
Awesome, thank you, Jeff. This one is from Taylor Kemp. Can applicants apply for the same site that received funding during Wave 1? And if so, does construction have to have been completed on funding Wave 1 sites before an applicant can apply for a second wave funding at the same location?
So this is something I can jump in on. Thank you so much for your question here. Excuse me. That a site is only allowed one rebate payment from Communities in Charge. So if you are applying for a particular installation site address in the state of California, you receive that incentive from from Communities in Charge and complete your project, then that would complete out your eligibility for that particular project site.
Thank you, Jeff. Another one, to qualify for the prioritization community multifamily housing in charge, must it be low income housing?
I can take that one. So this is kind of related to the conversation of community connections. And as a reminder, community connections are identified sites that have significance to communities around you. And to be able to qualify to be a community connection is you have to submit a set of documents that are all listed in the implementation manual. And if you're able to meet those requirements, you will get an additional 10 points in the rubric scoring. You do not have to be a community connection to apply for the project. So if you decide to apply as a multifamily housing, and you submit the documentation for a multifamily housing site, that documentation to be a community connection, you'll get that additional 10 points. So if you choose not to do so, you just will get that 10 points in the rubric, but you are still eligible and you can still receive the additional $3,500 incentive if you choose to apply that way.
Thank you, Sio. One from Ted. What is the significance of incurred cost date? What has to be done / documented by this date?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ted. So the date before which costs incurred are considered ineligible for Funding Wave 2 of Communities in Charge was September 28th, 2023, meaning any costs incurred towards a prospective project site that you may apply for under Communities in Charge, any costs incurred prior to that date are ineligible. Now, you have you may incur other costs so long as they are not associated with the with beginning construction up to November 7th, but any and all costs incurred prior to September 28th, 2023 are ineligible for incentives for Funding Wave 2.
Thank you, Jeff. I believe Dawn, you had the same kind of follow-up question. Hopefully, I believe that Jeff was able to answer that for important dates that incurred in September 28th. Is that correct? Date has passed. Same thing with the morning. Perfect. So go ahead and we're going to run to Joseph Diaz. What does a vendor need to do in order to be spec'd as an approved vendor?
I can take that one on. I think there's two ways to think about this here. If you're talking about a vendor in the form of a equipment provider, such as an original equipment manufacturer, the requirements for equipment manufacturers to have their chargers meet, those are all outlined in the implementation manual, and we touched on them briefly here during today's presentation. If you have an OEM with whom you are currently having conversations and they do not see their equipment listed on our website, have them reach out to our team as we are working to finalize the list of eligible equipment for Funding Wave 2. If you are more referring to eligible vendors or installation professionals for Communities in Charge, there is not a list of explicit eligible vendors, installation professionals that you must choose from in order to participate in Communities in Charge. We just ask that you certify that they are abiding by all of the necessary state, local, federal codes, standards, laws, regulations, etc. That essentially the site is being installed in a manner consistent with all the regulations that might pertain to it.
Thank you, Jeff. An anonymous attendee, just for clarification, do sites have to have chargers accessible to the public?
I can take that one. Public accessibility is not required, so you can choose to have a private site or public. But if you are a public site, just be sure to meet the requirements, which is like, you know, having a paying mechanism on your charger and all of the other state and federal regulations around it. It is listed in the implementation manual.
Thank you, Sio. For projects in multifamily buildings, is it required that chargers be in unassigned spaces?
I can take that one as well. It is required that chargers are in unassigned spaces. No charger could be assigned to one particular person. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Sio. Another anonymous, could you clarify the eligibility of stacking rebates with other utilities? Does this only apply to current active incentives with the specific end titles? The implementation manual specifies receiving funds. Could you clarify what that means?
Sure. So any project sites that are currently participating with investor-owned utilities or LADWP, and this is specifically for Funding Wave 2, any project sites who are participating in existing incentive programs through any of those, and that would include San Diego Gas and Electric, Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, and LADWP. If you are currently participating in an EV charging incentive program through any of those, then you are not eligible to participate in Communities in Charge. If, however, you have participated in the past in any of those programs, the project site has been completed, commissioned, and energized, meaning it's fully operational, but you've participated in those programs, you may participate in Communities in Charge to add additional chargers to that particular project site. Essentially, the two, your project site cannot be participating simultaneously in both Communities in Charge and a investor-owned utility or LADWP funded Make Ready or EV charging incentive program.
Thank you, Jeff. From Demetrius Edwards, our church has a lot and there is no affix address, but we have a parcel number. Should we list our main address and include the parcel number for the location of the project site?
Thanks for your question, Demetrius. That's an interesting one. I think it is acceptable if there is a challenging street address for you to identify. The only caveat to that I would call out is that new builds, meaning this does need to be an existing lot and it does need to be paved and ready for the chargers. It cannot be something that is just essentially an open lot waiting to have or an open plot rather, waiting to have paving put down.
Thank you, Jeff. And anonymous attendee, where can I find the Zoom recording and when? I can answer that. After this Zoom is done, we will be sending it to the attendee list that you have registered with via email. You can also find it on our website. It should be available within the next week or two. But yes, you go ahead and get that sent over to you. I'm going to go ahead and read off some of the questions that were already answered in the text. Brian Arto, will this be recorded and sent out? Yes, we already covered that. So James, I read through the implementation manual. It seemed that this funding is not for large public fleets, for behind the fence charging. Is that the case? Communities in Charge and funding is only for light duty vehicle charging. However, light duty behind the fence fleets may apply. So that was that one. Let's see.
The next one here is where can I find the recording? They have a meeting to attend. Just again, we will make the recording and slides available shortly after the meeting concludes. Usually should be in a few days or up to a week. Again, where can you find the meeting? Those will be made available across a handful of mediums, including the Communities in Charge project website, as well as shared out through the CalSTART Compass newsletter. One from Shannon. I work for It's Electric, a curbside EV charging company. Will CalSTART be providing a list of property owners / eligible applicants who are interested in applying for this funding for partnering purposes? Thanks for the question. Communities in Charge currently utilizes applicant materials submitted strictly for the purpose of processing those applicant requests for incentives. Another question from Chantel, what is an IOU and LADWP? IOU, investor-owned utility, and that would be Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Pacific Gas and Electric, or PG&E. LADWP is Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Will the slides be made available? Yes. How many hours a day do the chargers need to be publicly accessible? So chargers which are publicly accessible must be open for at least 18 hours per day, excluding holidays. Chargers are not required to be made public, for example, workplace charging, multifamily housing project sites, and we encourage you to see the implementation manual for further information and further preclusions around behind the fence versus in front of the fence charging project sites. Next question from Andy. In the last funding cycle, what percentage of Tier 1 and Tier 2 applicants received awards, and has that info been released? Great question. All of the awardees did end up being in Tier 1, and the information will be released in the next couple of weeks. We're currently finalizing a results web page and incorporating that into our website, so stay tuned. That should be made available here in the next couple of weeks. Subsequent rounds of funding should reach that resource at a much faster clip. Next question. Are these documents that we can upload before the applications open, or we gather them proactively to be prepared for when the applications are open? You will not be able to upload documents before applications open, so before the opening of Funding Wave 2 on November 7th, but we do encourage you to gather them proactively and use the application checklist we have published on our website for you to kind of keep everything together in anticipation of the opening of that funding wave. Another question here, does replacement of non-operational chargers qualify for funding under this funding program? We would encourage you to submit your application with a make-ready/replacement form. Now, if this is, when we say non-functioning, I think there's a little bit of nuance that we would want to tease out there. If this is something that has sustained, let's say, physical damage, and you are looking to replace it, that is not something that we would be able to install. However, this is something that is, say, out of date and maybe not a network charger, for instance. That's something that we may be able to incentivize. All right, will we be able to provide a PDF version of the application questions so that prospective applicants can have the ability to work on it outside of the application and then submit it through the portal? Yes, we do have that application checklist that can help you gather the information that you might need, and you can find that in the resources section of our website. It's a good question. Do you require the project site to be located in priority zones? So project sites are not required to be located in priority populations, or otherwise known as disadvantaged and low-income communities. So that is not required. However, it does increase your likelihood of being selected for award, given it increases the equity rubric score, which you may receive, and the likelihood of selection therefore increasing. Another question from Ted. If you are acting as an agent, do you create your own login or create a unique one for the entity you are representing? Whomever is the applicant applying for funds and whomever is receiving those funds need to be the same entity. So if you are an agent applying on behalf of a commercial client, that is acceptable. But we do encourage you to take a close look through the implementation manual to bear in mind all of the requirements that might come from that. Meaning, if you are an applicant, you are also going to be the recipient of incentive dollars. They cannot be redirected to a third party. I had a question here that looks like someone was logging into the Incentive Processing Center, and it indicates that the application window is now closed. That is correct, meaning that the application window for Funding Wave 1 has closed. However, the application window for Funding Wave 2 is not open yet, and we shared that the opening will be in November 7th. So on November 7th, you will be able to begin submitting applications all the way up through December 22nd till 5 p.m. PST. Question around, did I understand correctly that we need to install at least 4 charging devices in order to qualify for funding? You must install at least 4 connectors, whether that be 4 individual connector EVSEs or 2 dual connector EVSEs. You must install at least a total of 4 connectors at your project site in order for it to be eligible. So community connection, can we clarify what is a community connection? A community connection is defined as a project site with particular benefit to its surrounding community, and applicants whose project site may be identified as such must meet specific requirements. There's a whole lot of them, so we won't read them out here. So we would just indicate that they are all outlined within the implementation manual, meaning what must you be to be considered a particular community connection, and therefore what documentation must you provide. EVITP, does a project require this? Yes, an EVITP certified electrician is required for installation. Is EVITP certification required with application, or can we provide that information later? You can provide that information later. It's not required to be available at the time you submit an application to Communities in Charge. We have a question here on where can the list of eligible equipment be found? You can find that catalog on the website under our eligibility tab. There's a title that says eligible equipment. You'll find a catalog there that you can filter and find whichever equipment you might be looking for. If you notice a particular charger or a particular make is not represented on that list, then we would encourage you to get in touch with whomever the manufacturer is of that particular charger and ask that they get in contact with our team as we are working to finalize the list of eligible chargers and publish those to the website for Funding Wave 2. I'll try and skip over a few that I know that we have answered live here. Okay, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Chris. I know you had some technical difficulties on the back end, making sure that you're still with us here.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Jeff, for stepping in on that. We do have some questions in the Q&A chat box. Brent, I did see your hand was up, and I believe you posted that in the Q&A section. I'll go ahead and read yours off first, sir, because I know your hand was up, and I do apologize for that. Will the program consider the state EVCS permit scoring in the consideration of tier replacement? For example, allowing tier 1 status for an application in the city of Compton, which is not streamlined. If the applicant can provide evidence that they are in the process of applying and receiving the permit.
This is Jeff. I'm happy to address that. The requirements to meet a particular readiness tier are firm in that a tier 1 status would need to be accompanied by an issued building permit from the appropriate authority having jurisdiction, the final site plan, and the site verification form. If you are unable to provide those on or by the end date of Funding Wave 2's closure of the funding window, then you may qualify for a different tier, perhaps tier 2 or tier 3. We do recognize that the permit streamlining map has offered up some different experiences for people on the ground. However, in order to optimize for rapid access to incentive dollars for those projects which are ready to move forward with construction, we are requiring that tier 1 applicants do have that permit in hand.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy has a hypothetical question. If an office building wanted to apply for a workplace in charge rebate, would they have to find evidence that one of the tenants meets the NAICS code and or meet the smaller business criteria?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yes. So if an office building wanted to apply for a workplace insurance rebate, would they have to find evidence that one of the tenants meets the NAICS code designation or meets the small business criteria? Yes, that is correct. If one of your tenants is able to provide that and you can provide it as proof and documentation for a community connection, then you are able to apply for the workplaces in charge community connection.
Thank you, CEO. Are there charger uptime requirements for this round of funding?
This is Jeff. I can answer that. So there are charger uptime requirements with Funding Wave 2, as there were charger uptime requirements with Funding Wave 1. It is worthwhile to note there. So you must comply with AB 2061 requirements, including ensuring a minimum of 97% uptime of all level 2 EVSEs receiving communities in charge incentives for 6 years. And that is defined further in the terms and conditions that we have published to our website.
Thank you, Jeff. As of now, there are no questions in the chat or no one's hand is up as I see. I'll go ahead and continue to leave it open just for a few minutes longer in case anyone does have any questions that do come to mind last minute before I move on to our next slide. Okay, and I see no questions are coming in. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one. Let's see. So thank you all once again for joining us, and thank you all for those wonderful questions. I hope we were able to answer them thoroughly. And if not, feel free to send us any through either our website, connections, so we can answer them as best as we can. What to look forward to and how to apply part 2. So part 2 is going to be October 19th. From 10 a.m. Pacific time to about noonish. Same with this. What to look forward to: some more information on required documents, review of eligible and ineligible costs, and the process for midpoint and final payments. So definitely mark your calendars for that webinar. In closing, I just want to say thank you all for your time. We really do appreciate all the feedback we're getting, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Hope you all have a good rest of your. Sorry, looks like we have one more question. No worries, I'll go ahead and get it and see Jenny. Let's see. Jenny is from Switch Energy. She has 2 questions. To confirm if the multifamily housing property is gated properly and chargers are installed in unassigned parking spaces is considered a private access site, correct? What is the average score for the scoring rubric out of Tier 1 and receiving funding?
Chris, I was looking for that question just so I could see it in writing here. Ah, there it is. Bear with me, Jenny. I just want to take a look back through your question one more time. Okay, so to answer your first question and confirm, multifamily housing project sites are often going to be gated. We do not make that determination as it is determined at the project site. However, those chargers are to be intended for the residents themselves, and they are not to be installed, they are not to be assigned rather to any particular one individual who happens to live at that particular site. Second question, what's the average score from the scoring rubric out of Tier 1 that received funding? I assume this is going back to Funding Wave 1. We had a number of applicants who received the full extent of scores, which would mean that they got an 18 points out of a possible 18. And I believe we got all the way down to I'd have to double check this, but there were a few applications in there that only had a few points. So it was a large spread of scores that were awarded during funding wave 1 for tier 1 applicants.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. If there are no more questions, I'll go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you all once again for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day.